LeetCode problem number 206, reverse a linked list. So given the head of a singly linked list, reverse the list and return the reverse list, right? Simple enough. So assuming we're given this list right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this last node always points to null in a linked list. So we have this list here and we're given the head 1. How would we reverse this? Just visually, just doing it visually without worrying about anything. We know we could just take the last node and make it the new first node. And then instead of pointing to null, we would actually make it point to the previous node, which is 4. And then we would make 4 point to the previous node, which is 3. And then we do it until we reach the back to the start, right? So 5 would point to 4. 4 would point to 3. 3 would point to 2. 2 would point to 1. And of course, since 1 is the new last element, 1 would point to null, right? So 1 points to null. This is actually the answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, null. So doing it visually is easy, but how would we actually do this in code, right? How could we create an efficient solution in Java code? So the first thing you want to do is you want to initialize 2 variables, right? So you want the cur, which will be a list node. And the first initialization of cur will be equal to the head, because you're given the head and you have to start there in order to iterate through the list. And then we also want to initialize a list node variable called prev in order to keep track of the previous nodes. So in this case, what should we initialize prev? So if the current node is 1, the previous of the current node would obviously equal the null, right? Because there's nothing behind it. So previous should equal null for now. And then we want to loop through while cur is not null, because we're going to use cur to iterate through like so until we reach the end, until eventually cur becomes null when we're over here, when we do enough iterations. And then that's how we know to stop the loop, right? But at the very beginning of the loop, we want to keep track of what is next to the current node in the original list, and we can call that temp next. And this will be reinitialized every single time at the beginning of the I wrote next really bad, but it's all good. At the beginning of the loop. So temp next should equal to 2, because that's the next of the cur. So temp next equals 2 here. Okay. So now we have temp next, we have everything set up, and now how do we actually reverse it, right? So all we do, we simply make the next of the current node equal to the previous, right? So instead of 1 pointing to 2 here, it would actually be 1 points to null. And then this would be the first step in reversing the list. And then remember, we have to iterate forward, but before we iterate forward, we have to update the rest of the variables. So what should prev equal, right? So assuming we're going to iterate forward, it hasn't happened yet, but let's just assume the next iteration will take us here. So the prev of this one will actually be 1. So the prev should now be assigned to cur, which is 1. So prev gets assigned to cur, right? And now, in order to iterate forward, all we do is we update the cur. So instead of cur being this node right here, we make cur equal to temp next. Remember, that's why we needed the temp next. So cur is equal to temp next. And what do you know? That's the first iteration of the loop, right? So if we go over the next iteration, we have cur equaling to 2. Okay, cur is not equal to null. So first thing we do, we update temp next. So temp next is equal to cur.next. So what is cur.next? As you can see, cur.next is equal to 3. So boom, simply update it. Really sorry about like butchering this handwriting right there. So cur.next is equal to 3, right? Okay, and then temp next is equal to 3. And then we update cur.next. So cur.next, instead of equaling to 3, which was what we assigned to temp next, we want to assign it to prev, which is 1, right? We want to assign it to prev. So cur.next equals prev. So this is cur right here. Instead of it going to this way to 3, we want to assign it to prev, which is 1, as can be seen right here. Now we update the rest of the variables in order to get ready for the next iteration. So prev should equal to cur, which is 2, as can be seen. Then we want to update cur in order to do the iteration itself. So cur, instead of cur equals 2, cur will equal to 3, right? And now we're here in the iteration, right? So it's gonna keep going and iterating over and over again until eventually cur is null, and then the loop stops. But by that point, the list will look like this. Four, and then 5, and then it'll be null. It'll be like this, null. So as I said, it's going to loop while cur is not equal to null. So when cur becomes null, cur will be here at the end of the loop, right? So we can't return null. But what do we want to return? We want to return the head of the reversed list. So the head of the reversed list is 5. Okay? So by the end of the loop, how do we know what variable is equal to this node that has the value 5? It'll be the previous of cur. So why don't we just return prev, right? And that's exactly what you do. You return prev at the end because it'll return the very start of the reversed list. So this is looking a bit messy, but as you can see, it's just simply the list reversed. If I want to write it out again, it'll look like this. 5 points to 4, which points to 3, which points to 2, which points to 1, right? And this is the answer. So you return 5, which is equal to prev in the end. I hope that explanation made sense. I know it got a bit complicated and messy with the writing, but we'll just go ahead and code it right now. Alright, so here we are on the LeetCode, and the very first thing you want to do before you create any while loop or anything like that, you want to initialize the 2 variables that you will need. So you need list node cur equals head. So cur is the node that you're going to be using to iterate through the list. So it has to start at the beginning of the given list, which is the head. Then you want list node prev, and that should equal to null. So assuming we start at 1 here, if you can see my cursor on the left, what's the previous of this node, node 1? Previous is obviously null because there's nothing there. So that's how we want to start with initializations for now before we update it in the loop. So we want to loop while cur is not equal to null, because if you remember, we're going to use cur to iterate through the list. So it's going to go forward. Eventually it's going to reach this last node, and it's going to try to iterate again, and it's going to be null, and then the loop will break, and that's exactly what we want. So the first thing you want to do in the loop is you want to update a list node variable called temp next, because we'll use temp next to iterate forward, in order to iterate forward, basically. Yeah, so temp next is equal to cur.next. Now here's where we want to do the actual begin the actual swapping. So cur.next, right now cur.next is equal to 2, but we actually want to make it equal to the previous node. In this case it happens to be null, so we want to make cur.next equal to prev, and that's basically the main swapping functionality, right? Okay, so we update cur.next equals to prev. Now we want to update prev is equal to cur, because we're assuming we're going to iterate forward. We want prev to also iterate forward, right? So prev will go from null to 1, and then now cur will go from 1 to 2. So cur equals temp next. That's where the temp next variable comes in. It had to hold the cur.next value, right? because we did change it here. So if we made it cur equals cur.next, that obviously wouldn't work. So that's why we need the temp next. And if I'm not mistaken, that's pretty much it. It's very simple, very easy to code. And then we return prev. So assuming assuming this loop goes all the way through and we make it to the end, cur will actually equal to null in the end, right? We don't want cur to equal to null. I mean, we don't want to just return null because that doesn't help us. We want to return the previous of null, which would be 5, which would be the start of the reverse list, which is exactly what the solution is asking for. So let's run this. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay, it works. Yep. So we can submit this, and boom, this is a O of n solution where n is the amount of nodes in the given linked list, right? So simple enough. If you enjoyed, if this helped you, just go ahead and subscribe or comment. Thanks for watching.